welcome everybody to NIRSA's Idea in Motion webinar series. Today, we're going to look at what student staff want from their work experience. This topic is really meaningful to my heart because, I got into campus recreation mainly because of students. I'm not a sport and rec guy, or wasn't a sport and rec guy when I got into this. I was a student staff in campus rec, but not because of a degree requirement or that. And I've been in student affairs. I worked with Residence Life and worked with international students before I came back to campus recreation. And really my focus to move back to campus recreation was students and working with student leaders and knowing that all students have made that choice in higher education to work on their skills, and it's just a group of people that are dear to my heart. So I'm really happy for today's topic. So I'm Marc, and as I mentioned, I have over 20 years building inclusive programs and communities through my work in senior leadership at roles at several institutions through student affairs, campus recreation, and community development. I founded Bonobo Consulting, which helps organizations shift focus from systems to people and looking at fostering belonging where everyone feels invited, welcome, and included. And so this webinar series really does focus a lot on the concept of belonging, which will kind of weave its way into the conversation. And again, today we're going to explore how we foster belonging from a student staff perspective, focusing on how we create meaningful experiences and build a nurturing work culture. And the difference between this webinar, hopefully, if you've caught the other two previously, and there'll be two more after this, is we are really looking at more of a conversational aspect. So focusing on storytelling and lived experiences and less of a show and tell approach. That also means that because it's going to be conversational, the guests are encouraged to talk to each other and ask questions and have this flow. But it also means that because it's a conversation with the four of us, we will look at the chat and it will be active, but we're hoping that the chat is more for the attendees to kind of ask each other questions or reinforce things. If something comes from the chat that's really powerful or there's a question that comes through, we may get to that and include it, but the conversation may turn into organic, which means we may go off topic a little bit, which is going to be okay. The last part is if there are any questions for any of the panelists or myself, and it's in the chat, we will make sure that at the end of the webinar, we will collect that data from the chat and make sure we get back to anybody that has questions. So with that, I'm going to start off with introducing my NIRSA friends. We're going to start off with Belinda Sanchez, who is the Graduate Assistant of Fitness and Wellbeing at Texas A&M Commerce. She's a second-year graduate student focusing on her master's in health, kinesiology, and sports studies. Belinda also serves as the Vice Chair for the NIRSA Region 4 Communications Committee and as a Texas student leader. On her spare time, she enjoys taking group fitness classes, game nights, and found out that her favorite game is Mexican bingo, and spending time with her family. We also have Tanika Santos, who is the NIRSA student leader and fitness and wellness graduate assistant at the University of Kentucky. She's in her second year of her master's degree in kinesiology and health promotion. She teaches kickboxing, yoga, and cycle, among the other formats, and has been a personal trainer for 4 years. She added some fun stuff, which means she enjoys traveling, cooking, but mentions here mostly for eating, and trying new things, especially foods. I'm seeing a trend here. Her name is a fusion of an Australian Cupid and a Peruvian oasis. Maybe we'll learn more about that through our conversation. She hopes to be a part of recreation advancement through education, professional development, and relationship building. And finally, Chad, and not finally, Chad's bio is he's a rec sports supervisor at Mount Royal University in Calgary, Alberta. He sees yada, yada, yada. And the reason I'm saying yada, yada, yada is why I invited Chad is Chad has worked with me for over 10 years. The key focus is that Chad, when he was a student, and it doesn't come off in here, Chad, when he was doing his undergrad, I think took over 3 professional roles throughout that time. So sport information coordinator, intramural and clubs coordinator, and business manager at the University of Waterloo, all while doing his undergrad. So that is pretty phenomenal. And now he supervises students. So kind of makes him a bit of an expert of being a student leader and a student supervisor. But he also likes volleyball, soccer, pickleball, completing escape rooms. And Chad and I have done a couple successfully. And frustratingly enough, he says he's a loyal fan of the Detroit Red Wings. And that is frustrating. I'm sorry to hear that, sir. So
not quite as painful as the Maple Leafs last night, but we won't go down that road right now.
That's true. And now we're talking hockey. And so Chad and I are both Canadians, so maybe we're going down the wrong road here with hockey. So welcome, the three of you. I like to start these webinars off with more of a focus of just what is happening with you right now. What's important to you? And it doesn't necessarily have to be work related. It can be family, friends, just professionally or personally, what you're up to. And we're going to start with Belinda. Belinda, what's important to you right now?
I think the biggest thing that's important to me right now is making sure that both myself, my family, and just anyone around me just feels safe and just secure, and that they know that they have someone that they can turn to talk to lean on if there's anything that they need, because it's very difficult times, and just acknowledging that for somebody else is very, very important in my heart right now.
And how are you doing that, do you think?
I am checking in with everyone. So like, I have never had so many text messages in my life. My phone is just constantly blowing up, just because I want to make sure that everyone, it's just a small text in the morning. I'll do motivational Mondays. I took that from my previous AD. So it's just like a little motivational quote that we'll send out in the mornings through like any group chat that I'm in, or just checking in with our staff who's coming in, checking in with my family, seeing how they're doing, and just kind of keeping that communication chain open.
Very cool. And Tanika, what about you?
Yeah, safety is huge. We are back on campus at the University of Kentucky, so there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety that I personally am feeling, and then I've definitely recognized in some of our staff members. And so I think for me, what that has led to is a lot of reflection and self-exploration on what it is that I'm experiencing right now, to be able to give my students that open door of, hey, I'm probably freaking out just as much as you, but we're going to get through it together. And that's sort of how I've been able to facilitate some of those more open conversations. And as we have students coming back to campus this coming weekend, our trainings will be this weekend as well. I'll actually get to see everyone in person again, which will give me that opportunity to hopefully continue that conversation and let people know that no matter what happens and we're all riding in the same storm, I'll still be here for them. So yeah, definitely certainty and just a little bit of that internal reflection.
Mm-hmm.
Chad?
And I think for me, I live out in Calgary, Alberta, but my position was furloughed for the summer. So we're going back on campus in a few weeks. And I'm back in Ontario with my parents working on a farm there. I don't get to see a lot of family and friends a whole lot, just it's a 4-hour flight and we usually come back for Christmas time and that's about it. So I think for me, kind of similar to what Tanika and Belinda said, it's spending time with those people you don't get to spend a lot of time with. And I guess the silver lining is we're able to do that a lot more, whether it's virtually, and we play online euchre a lot and those kind of things, like things we would have never probably thought of to connect with people before. We're doing that a lot more now, and it'll be interesting to see how that kind of shifts and evolves as we get back to a new normal. But I think that's been making the best of an uncertain situation. So that's been nice having that opportunity too.
So it's interesting. Everyone mentioned connections, right? And kind of connecting to belonging as well. So as you know, as we look at the power and importance of connection, and Chad, you touched on this, we could have been doing this before, right? I'm right with you. I'm texting high school friends that we check in with each other every day, and before this we maybe never did. And so we have this pandemic kind of pushing that. How does that, when we talk about student staff, and Tanika, you're talking about having them come back onto campus and all that, how important is connection and thinking about connection with our student staff during this time? And, maybe what are some of the ways you're facilitating that, but maybe more touch on, maybe some things that have been highlighted because of this pandemic of things you when this is all over, you're going to take that learning and understanding and continue to apply it.
Mm-hmm. I think connection is essential. NIRSA has been one of the few organizations where I've really felt that be authenticated and promoted. And my personal student experience, the most profound ones that I ever had were not necessarily around the work, but the conversations outside of that, or a supervisor recognizing that I wasn't doing okay and being open enough to ask me about it, I think. And I've been able to do that for students in the reverse. So I think one thing that being in quarantine, being isolated has really highlighted, which I'm hearing from a lot of people, is getting to that deeper level. It's really easy to just check in and say, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing fine. But really like, hey, how are you really doing? And sometimes that might feel a little bit pushy or a little bit targeting. And so the way I like to do it is usually, I am feeling this or that, I am experiencing this or that. And that gives people an open door, if they choose to walk through it, to say, oh, so am I, or actually, I'm really feeling this. And it gets a little bit counselly, but I do think we are mentors and we are supposed to be helping our students in regards to their professional development, but also their personal development. And that's something that I think I'm going to definitely carry in my professional and personal life after we're out of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we'll probably dive deeper into that later, I'm thinking, but I think that's one of the biggest things I found that ties to the discussion we're going to have today is a lot of people who are in our environment are, some of them certainly like myself, wanted to use that as a stepping stone to get to somewhere down the road. But for a lot of our student staff, what they're wanting out of their work experience oftentimes is just that connection and feeling like they belong to the university or to the recreation or athletics team or whatever piece that is. And like, I agree. I think a lot of times it's not necessarily about the work. That's obviously a key part of it, but it's what happens beyond the check boxes of your day-to-day tasks. And that's where students are going to stay. And what I found is where students get the most value out of their work experience is a lot of those intangibles as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think one of the biggest things that I learned, and when trying to establish that connection, especially with like my staff, has been that texting is not going to cut it. So that was a big shocker for, I think, not just myself, but for them as well. So I started scheduling phone calls with them, which was completely new to them. But that definitely allowed us to just go beyond talking about that work scenario and check in as to, like Tanika said, how they're really feeling. Because it's very easy in just text to just give a thumbs up, give an emoji, say, yeah, I'm good. But that like conversation that you have over the phone kind of brings a different feeling and has gotten more conversation out of them than I had previously had. So that was something that I'm really, really going to take away from this.
Yeah, I was a student leader way back in the day. I mean, I ran intramurals where we didn't have that old internet where we had to type up schedules and standings and post them around the facilities and had captains find us somewhere to complain that something wasn't right. But, that connection, and I wasn't a sport guy. I really liked basketball, but I don't think I was that traditional, found my place of belonging through sport. But recreation, campus recreation, and my intramural supervisor at the time, and I'm going to give him huge shout outs. He's a teacher now. He doesn't know this exists, but Joe Cascagnet, really gave me that place of belonging where, I don't like, well, not that I don't like to admit this, but I struggled in first year. I was in math, so I wasn't in rec, and I almost failed out of university, and found a bit of a home through campus recreation. And again, it wasn't through sport, but through that connection. We used to have what was called stand-up meetings, where we'd play pool with my supervisor and talk and check in. And just hearing from you, that just kind of sparked, I didn't think about that until now, but how important that was for me to feel connected to my university experience. Because we've heard that story, with other students where, I found my home here and, I might not have returned if it wasn't for that. And how true that is. And it's important that when we think about that, how are we intentionally creating that? Because I'm not sure at that time, Joe was the type of person that was reading leadership books and, this is how you create a work culture. It just was in his nature, right? He was a people person and, he put people first. And so when I think about that, how do we put our students first and especially our student staff first, when we have so many competing priorities?
Yeah, I'll maybe jump in to start here. I think, and this is going to seem very common sense, but I'm not sure how often it happens intentionally. we need to seek out and ask our staff that, whether it's directly as part of a hiring process, whether it's when they are our staff and just going for a coffee, and whether you talk about work or not, just getting to know the people you have working for you and asking them what they want out of that work experience. So I know when I started as a student, there was roughly 15 senior student staff who did intramurals specifically. It's where a lot of my work is. And I was literally the only one in recreation and leisure at that time. Everyone else, like Marc, was in math as well. And I found that to be very, very strange at the start. You just think, oh, all the sports people are going to gravitate to that thing. And that's not necessarily the case. And when you got to find out why people wanted to be there, the ranges were so far across a spectrum that was really valuable to know how to lead certain staff. So for example, a couple of my staff now, one of them's similar to me, I would say. He is in sport and rec. He wants to pursue a career in that. We'll have conversations that way. He's very interested in event management, those kind of things. I have other staff who are in human resources, and they're very interested in leading staff and mentoring and training, and uses recreation as that vehicle to help pursue that. Our conversations, even though on paper those staff are doing the exact same job, are very different. And I'm going to take advantage of their skills, get them to have a really good experience. And it could be vastly different, even though they're more or less doing the same thing on paper. But until we've been very directive in seeking that out, I think myself, for sure, I made a lot of assumptions of what people were doing the job for. People might want it for a paycheck. They might want it for professional development. They might have all their buddies, and this is just a way they can hang out with them further, kind of thing. But it's really important to outright ask that or clarify that information, because it'll make their experience that much better. And chances are you'll get a better return from them as well, and their affinity to the program as well.
Now, Belinda and Tanika, you are still pursuing a degree, correct? So how does that, Chad's a full-time supervisor. How does that challenge the fact that you're prioritizing your own education as well as your programs and staff and things like that?
Yeah, I think especially hearing that priority for me, and I think for a lot of people in NIRSA, the students are the priority, and it's harder as you can get further away from students where that priority might start to fall to the wayside of other things that come up. And I would say as a graduate assistant, it's very big as for advocating your students and advocating for them, being that counterpoint, that liaison, that voice. And I think exactly what you were saying, Chad, is I would usually make those assumptions of what my students needed in this idea that I was providing all these opportunities for them. So I was doing my job. And then talking with them, that individualistic approach is super important, because people are in it for so many different reasons and wanting so many different things. And so being that voice as a graduate assistant, you may not have a lot of power, but you do have a say. And so being able to say what it is and advocate for them is huge. And yeah, I would say just having that connection and continued connection, which I think Belinda was really talking about, of that conversation over the phone. And if it's able to be in person now, but I do think that phone is really going to be a highlighting point, because it's so easy to check that box of, oh, I contacted everybody, but did I actually sit down and have a conversation with everyone to really get at the core of what it is that they're wanting from their experience?
Yeah, it's very difficult as a graduate assistant because you have so many things to balance, and most of us typically put in more hours than we are required. So we're here all the time with our students. So we are able to be that voice, and that's very important. But for me, everything that Chad said was something I got to experience in my undergrad, and it made the world of a difference, and it's why I'm here today. My AD was really, really wonderful about playing to everyone's strengths, and that's something that I've tried to bring with me to my current position, and to really, walk into that conversation with our students with that in the back of our mind, because it was life-changing for me, and I kind of hope that I could provide that same experience for them.
All right, so we're talking about leadership here as well. So, Chad, who was your best boss and why was it me? No, I'm just kidding.
That's a very loaded question right there.
So, no, but when we talk about you know, your experiences and that, you know, that kind of tailored experience idea. You know, maybe you can each share a time when, you know, you felt like you had the best job, and what role did your supervisor play in creating that experience for you? And then maybe even on the flip side, was there a time when you felt like quitting, you know, and you thought, like, why am I doing this? And, you know, a mentor or a supervisor helped you through that, and what did they do?
Yeah, I think all of that for me happened in the same year of really high highs and really low lows. My senior year of college, you get told all your life it's going to be the best year of your life, and you're getting into your 20s and they're the best time of your life, and it's all becoming very apparent that it's all a lie. And so I was getting a lot of that need to fill my time with all of these important roles and be very achievement oriented and goal oriented, and realizing that I was running myself ragged. And one of the programs, or the best job that I had, was event programming, and going to my supervisor and saying, this is what's important to me. And my big thing was creating community in our campus recreation department for our patrons. We were seeing a lot of, you know, the buff boys coming in and like the skinny girls in their little leggings. And I'm like, what about the real people as well? And so wanting to create events that included people. And that's where she said, okay, started asking me questions to start getting the programming out of me, and realizing you just came up with something really fantastic. Let's start going with that. So having someone to kind of draw that out of me. And then as we were going along the process, she was also a graduate assistant while I was in my senior year, and her sort of recognizing that I was not doing okay. And I put on a really big happy face that a lot of people could kind of perceive as she's fine, or at least it made them feel better to think I was doing fine. And her being the one to say, are you doing okay? And that's when I started realizing, oh my gosh, no, I'm not. And the conversation turned to, you know, you have all these roles. It is okay if you need to take a step back. That is not a failure. That is not a loss. And you cannot pour from an empty cup. And hearing that someone could see that I was struggling and see that I was not okay, and let me know that it's okay to not be okay. I'd never heard those words in my life. And it's crazy now to think that I never heard it, because I feel like I hear it on a daily basis now. But recognizing where students are at and where they're coming from is very powerful, because it's a reminder to all of us that where we might have been may not be where they're at right now. And so in that same year, I went from 0 to 60 to 0 to 60 again, and just onward from there. And I think had I not had that mentor with me, I don't know if that program would have come to life and I would have been able to build that confidence. And then I don't know if I would have been starting that self-exploration journey that I did from that point on.
Yeah, so I have a very similar experience to yours, Tanika. I started with my previous AD, and it literally, like, I broke. I was overrun, I was overworked, and I went into her office and I collapsed to the floor crying. Like, it was a very, very difficult moment for me in my life, but she was the one who literally brought me back to life and was able to, you know, let me know that I could slow down, that I had to give something up and find that balance in order for me to be okay and pursue what I wanted. And it was from there that, like, her and I were able to work on a very, very close, like, relationship, and kind of move forward into, like, okay, what can I give up? Like, what is going to benefit me the most? What can I do without? And once I found that, like, life completely changed. Like, I was happier, I was well rested, and I was able to move through campus recreation, kind of move up the ladder and start to build that networking, build connections with people that I had worked with for, like, probably more than a semester, and I hadn't even had the opportunity to talk to. So learning from her and kind of seeing how she helped me, and eventually how she helped other students and other members of our staff who maybe might not have been going through the same things as me, but were going through their own personal rough patches, was definitely a big motivator. And I will forever, like, love her and thank her for everything that she did for me and helped me through that senior year, because it was rough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll maybe share one quick story from when I first started as a student, and I went through a co-op program, so we were assigned basic 4-month work terms to do different things. My first work term was with George Brown College in Toronto, and growing up, I lived on a farm, and I had zero work experience at all in my field. I loved growing up and doing the work I was doing, but when it came to real life experience, I was probably the lowest on the totem pole of in terms of experience they were looking for this job. Anyways, I got an interview. We had a great first co-op term, and then I knew I was coming back 4 months later. We alternated between school and co-op. And it was funny because I talked to my supervisor and the athletic director who was in the interview process and said, okay, I know I'm coming back, but what about my interview stuck out for you? This was my first interview I'd ever done. And my supervisor at the time looks through and I'm like, why'd you hire me? And she looks through and she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. We'll talk about that more. And then the athletic director the same way was like, honestly, Chad, like I don't really know why we hired you. And then a light went off and he said he grew up in Saskatchewan where farming was really big there. And he's like, I knew why you didn't have work experience because you had devoted your time to doing other things, but I knew the work ethic you would have. And I think it helped that I was the last interview of the day in that hiring phase. So I think that stuck out for me a little bit, but it was a hilarious moment for me thinking, here's my supervisor, my athletic director, who I've worked very closely with in my first ever role. And they're like, I don't know why we hired you. So I don't know what to tell you. But then in reflecting on that a little bit, I think those are big moments for me and for the rest of us where we had someone who saw something beyond our job description, or they met us where we are at. Like I saw that in the chat as well. They met us where we are at and created a good experience for us. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind a little bit too, that we'll get lots of applicants who have lots of very relevant work experience, but we'll have lots of students applying to work with us who have little or no relevant experience. And it's kind of that whole, you need 10 years of experience, but you've only been in school for 3 years. And it's kind of that revolving door a little bit that we need to try to meet people where they're at and hopefully get a good work experience for both of us and create that meaningful relationship as well.
Yeah, and Chad, I remember that story, and I remember when we hired you as a co-op student and, as an intramural convener. And, I just want to not challenge, but say, I think one of the issues with our profession, you talk about you didn't have experience, but you did. It depends on what we as hiring individuals value. Right. So do I value your ability to put an intramural schedule together? Do I value your certifications or that? Or do I value your mindset, the work ethic and things like that? And so when I think in hindsight of a lot of the students you mentioned, we didn't hire a lot of sport and rec students in UW intramurals. In fact, we had 1,200 student staff throughout all of campus rec, and maybe 10% were from the department, of applied health sciences. And I can recall getting fourth year students from applied health sciences asking, well, I want to get involved. I need some job experience. And we'd say, well, we've got some, entry level positions, but we have a lot of staff that have put in a lot of work in different ways that have earned and demonstrated their experience outside of applied health sciences, that they're going to take those leadership positions. And, they were dumbstruck by that. And I just think of all the student leaders that you've worked with, Chad, and all that. Again, they weren't from applied health sciences, and they came, but they brought those same values and that same connectivity and that same work ethic and care that we did value. And that's why they were hired. And so I think when we think about student staff and that experience they bring, is thinking about, well, what are we actually valuing? Is it their role? Is it their, I can do these tasks? And I think, I remember even letting go senior student staff. We're not letting go. We never fired anybody. We just said, maybe this term you need to take a break, because they stopped learning. They stopped taking the role and saying, well, they just thought I'm really good at this. I can do it really quickly. And so that's what I'm going to do. And then we want to give that experience to someone else then. Chad, you're a great example. You started off, you wanted volleyball. Am I correct? Am I remembering that right? Chad loves volleyball. He's a volleyball ref, still is a volleyball ref. And I gave him soccer because that's the space we had. We had a space in soccer. And so talking with Chad, was saying, hey, if you, I get, again, I know you know volleyball, but can you take that same work ethic and skills? And that's where he started in his intramural journey, was through soccer. And then eventually that person that I kicked out from volleyball was that student leader that was kind of mailing it in, and Chad took over it, and that speaks volumes to the work ethic that Chad brought and what we value. And so I think, again, it's really important for us to remember that we write the job descriptions. We are the ones looking for things that we're hiring. And so, what got you hired, Chad, was that I'll use farm boy because you use it a lot, but that farm boy work ethic and mentality, and also the sociability and all those things that made you successful as an intramural coordinator, was brought from that experience. And so we need to value those experiences.
Yeah, and I'll maybe piggyback off that, because I saw Courtney just wrote in the chat, like, all of those hard skills, and Belinda and Tanika can say the same thing when it comes to teaching group fitness and a number of different things. A lot of those hard skills you can teach, yet we seem to value those things a lot, yet this conversation is saying, no, we need to rethink that and value how we invite people to our programs, how we help them belong, how we make sure our staff are getting a great work experience. Yet I'm guilty of this. All of our training revolves around, okay, here's your check-in procedure, here's what you do to check that box. And we don't spend a lot of time really catering to what our students want in these transferable skills. And maybe that's something we need to think about, because I know we've said this already, a lot of our students are saying we're not really citing those hard skills on our resume, or we're not taking those to different positions, yet we spend an overwhelming amount of time in our staff trainings catering to those hard skills that they maybe don't really care about as much at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. I think that's huge, as well as we're preparing our trainings. We have a lot of COVID protocols and cleaning protocols and very minute details that need to be drilled in. But I also agree that for me, the most profound, lectures and like workshops and conferences that I've been to are the ones where it is so much more about creating community and creating a sense of belonging. And I definitely feel like when you walk into a space and you can feel that, it's tangible. And I always bring that back to my first Region 2 conference. I walked in and I just felt an energy that cheesy, but yes, like coming home. That's really what it felt like. And so being able to facilitate that within your staff is so huge. And I think it makes the work so much more enjoyable and so much more lifelong.
Yeah, the nitty-gritty stuff can get to your staff. So I always loved when like our AD started us off with like honestly just letting us play like a fun team bonding game. That was always the highlight before we knew we had to like come down and then get into those hard skills, into everything that was like super nitty-gritty, which we knew was the essence of the meeting. But having that like teamwork, that like team bonding where we got to like have a little bit of fun was part of what made it easier to kind of process everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Tanika, you mentioned one of the, a program that you were able to develop, and then you mentioned about, fostering that sense of belonging. And really one of the important aspects that I've always felt with student staff is that not only are you the lifeblood of the organization, but you're also where they are, where students are at, because they're students, right? And so, I realized quickly how far removed I got from students as I not only, moved up in the ranks, but also the distance between their experiences and the experience I had. Yet that power of connection is still there, but there's nothing more powerful than that invitation from a peer to do something. I can go out in the middle of campus and talk about how great campus rec is, and students are going, okay, whatever, old guy. But the role that the student staff have in creating that sense of belonging is so important. And I think, I think back to how we trained and all that. That wasn't always a focus for us. We didn't always talk and train them about how important a role they play in creating that sense of belonging for the students that we serve. So can you talk a little bit about maybe what you've done as students to create that invitation? Chad, you use that word invitation to help bring people in. So how can student staff utilize that sense of building community and that invitation to create that sense of belonging through campus recreation?
Yeah, definitely working in fitness. A lot of it is the self-promotion. As much as we put out our social media and things like that, it is so much more of an invitation. If someone knows your name and says, oh, hey, Sarah, I saw you came to my class last week, we're having an event. I think that really builds a bridge. And one thing that we like to do is kind of combine forces with our personal training, or more specifically, we have an exercise referral program, which is students going to health coaching, nutritional coaching, or counseling can be referred to us for free personal training for 10 sessions. And one thing we really encourage our trainers to do is to take them to a group fitness class and introduce them to our instructor. And so that creates a connection, and they feel a little bit more comfortable to say, I know this instructor, I know Tanika, I've taken her class. I was a little uncomfortable and wanted to stay at the back, but she knows who I am and she knows where I'm at. And I think that's something that I've been trying to facilitate for them, because it's a little bit more difficult when you get the same people walking in through the door. So how can we go outside of our four walls? And one thing that I found, for better or for worse, is absolutely social media. We get a lot of people saying, oh, hey, I saw you on the story. And so one thing that I've been trying to do, and I am someone who likes to just lead by example, because I would never ask you to do something that I haven't done. And we started a program of Tuesday takeovers. And so I've basically gotten on the story, said, hi, my name's Tanika, I'm a personal trainer, kickboxing instructor, here's the day in my life, and really encouraging our students to take that on. And we had a few who are really gung-ho and excited about it, and a few who are like, you're not putting my face on social media. So it's just a way for people to get really comfortable with presenting themselves. Hi, this is who I am, who are you? And I think that's where that connection all starts. And hopefully we can continue to grow that, especially now where there's less of that physical connection and being able to connect more virtually.
Yeah, prior to COVID, what we did is we would send our staff outside of the building. Like, we're like, go walk around campus, go talk about our programs. And we usually did it during like prime times. So they went out and we brought new people in, because they went and they talked to people who they might have never talked to, people who would have never heard of the rec, if they're like not social media heavy. And that just not only fostered community between the rec and the rest of our campus, but it also fostered community between our students and their peers. And additionally, something else that we really have worked very, very hard towards, especially because we're in a very small campus community, like our university is very tiny, is we really encourage all of our trainers and all of our staff to say hello to everyone that like they train with, that have come to their classes outside of the rec. I'm like, if you see somebody walking by and you know who they are, wave to them, smile, say hello. Like, they're gonna feel that sense of community, because they're gonna be like, oh, like they remember who I am. Like, Belinda knows my name, like I went to her class and like I'm being noticed. So that'll encourage them to come and talk to you after class, to maybe explore another program that they might have never thought about looking at. And that's worked very, very well when it comes to just really bonding our students and our community together.
And what I like about that, Belinda, too, is that, you know, when we talk about that sense of belonging, sometimes, well, actually more often than not, that connection isn't with the facility. I may not feel yet like I belong in a weight room or a fitness studio or on the gym floor, but I do feel that sense of belonging with someone else. And that person who invites and makes me feel welcome and included, that's where my sense of belonging starts. And so if we can nurture and facilitate that, and now they start coming into the facility with people that they know and feel comfortable with, then they can start feeling comfortable with the bricks and mortar. But so often we see the bricks and mortar being the I belong here space, and that's only for a very small few who already are comfortable with sport and rec. And the power of the people and the student staff in creating that sense of belonging and fostering it is so important. What about you, Chad?
Yeah, and I think that's important to note too. And there's a lot of staff that maybe don't want to be those people who are champions for your program in terms of, I don't want to go outside at tabling and do outside of those things. But what it makes me think of is allowing our student staff to do things that maybe they would have never considered before. Perhaps encouraging them if they're not comfortable doing something. I'm sure we all have really good examples where at the time of doing this task or this project, we hated it. We hated every minute of it. But when you reflect back on that, those are some of those experiences that have furthered your development the most, or, you know, you made a connection with someone else across campus you didn't know before and things like that. So that's another thing I often think about too, is giving students those opportunities, because at the end of the day, if our students fail, however we want to determine that, we're in a relatively safe space. The building's not going to collapse. There's the repercussions for them failing at a certain assignment is relatively low compared to a lot of other industries. And I think we should be allowing students to make that decision for themselves. So it's not necessarily about forcing them into roles that they're not comfortable with or they didn't sign up for. But I feel oftentimes we don't help them branch out as much as we can. And here's a good example where we're 4 fairly unique paths, but we're sharing a theme together of ideologies and things like that. So let's continue fostering that intentionally and see who wants to take advantage of those opportunities as well.
Yeah, I really like what you were saying, Chad, because it is a little bit of a push. I've needed those little bits of a push into uncomfortable areas. I mean, I'm fine being the face of something. What made me more uncomfortable was looking internally and kind of doing that process. And I still had someone who was not a professional in that telling me, hey, let's go there and it's going to be okay. And I think one way that I've tried to facilitate that is drawing it back to their goals. And so you say you want to do these things and I fully support you. Here's a way to do that. See how these two can connect and get you to that next level that you're looking to get to. And that comes from that individualized interpersonal connection. So I really like that point.
All right, I want to hear stories then. What were you asked to do that was outside of your comfort zone? Maybe even outside of your kind of roles and responsibilities, thinking, why am I doing that? That led to an experience where you said, wow, I would never have pursued that, but I'm really, and it might have been really tough and challenging, but I'm glad I did it because I'm a better person for it.
Oh yeah. Honestly, everything externally, if you gave me a program and told me to do it, I was doing it. Any task, I was doing it. My struggle was pouring from an empty cup and not looking inside myself to see where was I lacking and asking for my needs and wants to be met. And so my graduate assistant challenged me to ask and speak up, what do I need in this moment? And to me, that was, okay, well, I need a speaker. I need to make sure our plans are set up. I need to make, no, what do you emotionally, mentally, to continue providing the best opportunities you can for your students and your patrons? What do you need? And again, that was another question that I felt like I wasn't allowed to ask. And that wasn't something that I was allowed to speak up on because I was the student worker. I was the worker bee. I was the star achiever, whatever it was. And so I felt like that kind of vulnerability was really hard for me to bring up in a workplace and in a professional setting, or any setting really. At that point, I was super like, there's nothing under the sun that could, take this smile off my face. And having someone really say, it is okay if you need to step away, if you need to speak up for yourself, advocate for yourself, I will be here to support you. I'm not going to judge you for whatever it is that you might say next. And basically what that was for me is I need to take time away from this. I need to go to counseling. I need to actually work through my issues because they're going to continue popping up in my work because I have unresolved issues inside myself. And so again, it wasn't necessarily so much around the work tasks that was overwhelming me. It was just life and things going on underneath the surface that was affecting everything that was going on the surface as well.
Okay.
For me, it's exactly what I ask my students to do now, which is go out to campus and either hand out flyers or talk to people. So I'm a very, very big introvert, not extroverted at all. So that was the hardest thing for me to do when my AD was like, I have nothing for you to do. Go talk to people. And I was like, I freaked out internally. I'm like, you're asking me to do what? And I tried to get around it. I honestly did. I was like, no. I was like, I don't want to do this. This is not for me. What am I going to gain from talking to random strangers? And honestly, it's what helped me find my voice. And it's what really helped me with networking and talking to other professionals. And I don't think that if she had not pushed me to do that, I would have such a difficult time talking to you guys now. So that's something that I got to work through. And it's not something that I realized until after I left that facility. And I'm like, oh, this is why like I was doing that. I'm like, that makes more sense now. And it's something that I'm very grateful for, despite the fact that I did not like her for it.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like we've all kind of made connections with different people within our department or on campus. And when I came to Mount Royal University, there's a very strong Indigenous student population there. And I was very, very ignorant and didn't know hardly anything about Indigenous culture, history, or anything like that. When I started, I was finishing up my master's at the time and was struggling to find a topic that I wanted to cover. And through conversations with different individuals across campus, I ended up writing an article on Indigenous student retention through their role of being involved in campus recreation. That became very powerful for me, and I was super uncomfortable going into those first chats because I don't want to say the wrong words. I don't want to ask questions that might be really insensitive, but the couple staff that I really worked closely with were super receptive and knew that I was open and not coming from a place of being insensitive. I just frankly didn't know, kind of thing. So those are partnerships that were really positive for me when those projects were done, and we continue having those conversations now. But now we're champions for each other, and we came from a spot of kind of mutual respect rather than the traditional stuff before. We'd be like, okay, can we come talk at your orientation for 2 minutes? And hi, I'm Chad. You'll never see me again for another year, and I'll be back next year. And now it's a lot more reciprocal, and we have students who actually speak on behalf. We don't even have to go there anymore because they're group fitness instructors, they're intramural refs or lifeguards, and love our program so much and the opportunities that they were given. And that's much more authentic and will not fall on deaf ears the same where it was before, where we were, I feel like just checking the boxes. Okay, we've talked to our Indigenous Center, we've talked with our International Student Office, rather than actually creating a relationship with them and letting them be champions. And now it's far less work for us and far more impactful. And we're both in a much better spot as a result of that. So
it's an interesting kind of segue too, because you're utilizing students to not only necessarily do the work, but take ownership of that responsibility of making connections throughout campus. It doesn't always rely on the full-time staff. And so when I think about a reoccurring theme I've heard, either it's, and I've seen this throughout my whole career, hearing, especially with GAs, about being overworked and, putting more hours than they've been asked, to the point where we look at legal and rights about this. And maybe, Chad, you'll have the other side, because I feel like throughout my whole career, I've never really worried so much about work getting done, because it just gets done. And so I've never stressed that, and maybe I've always stressed that self-care and time, and that, the sports and fitness and all that, the building will still be there tomorrow. How do you, or what advice would you give to those students? Because, Tanika, you shared about, I felt like, and Belinda, you mentioned this too, until I got that chat with my AD or a mentor, I felt like I owned all of this and was the worker bee. So how do we prevent that? Because it shouldn't take a breakdown for intervention. And I get, supervisors are busy and, they may not recognize, and especially, but how do we get to that point so students don't come in feeling that way? So that, and that's really one of the challenges, because you shouldn't, right? Student staff should not feel stressed by, campus recreation work. Really what we do is very important, but it should be fun. It should be relaxing and that. So how do we prevent that so that it doesn't get to that point where we're waiting for a breakdown for an intervention?
Yeah, I'll maybe jump in first. I think one of the things that I've tried to do is re-envision the way we recruit staff, or what we highlight when we're posting jobs or things like that, or even the types of questions we ask in interviews, getting away from those transactional, can you do this, will you do this, versus here's the skills you're going to gain from that, and we'll approach that in a certain way depending on where your skill set's at, kind of thing. So when we have staff coming in to ref intramurals, for example, I may not want a certified volleyball official like myself to get on the stand, because they may be so black and white that they're not catering to the groups of people who are in the facilities at that time. Or with group fitness instructors, for example, spending more time on that, saying, here's the experience you're going to get out of it. Here's the relevant job experience you're going to get, rather than just checking that box to say you will be able to create a schedule when you're done. You will be able to perform CPR. You will be able to do these things. Those are obviously all valuable, and I'm not dismissing that at all, but changing the focus of what are we bringing you in to do, and what experience are you actually going to get? Because we know you're not really voicing those transactional checkbox type things you're doing anyway. And that'll change the type of people, hopefully for the better. I know my staff when I started was vastly different than what I have now, because I felt that there was just kind of that message being conveyed of here's the things we're going to do. And I wanted to change that a little bit and get them excited, so that when they do leave, they're not talking about, I can create a schedule. No, it's, I ran a league for 200 people and I was responsible for their safety and everyone had a great time. Not necessarily about those transactional pieces. So it was starting with changing the mindset entirely of looking at that.
A lot to unpack. I definitely think when fitness is one in particular where you get a lot of people who, personal training and group fitness is also very different. So I'll start there. With my personal trainers, they have to come into my office to check in their clients if they're in this building rather than the other one. And I made sure every time that I was in there and one of my trainers was walking through, I would turn around from my desk and make sure that I was like, hey, how are you doing? How is school? How are your work? Knowing if they have additional work opportunities. And taking any instance, we do regular monthly CPR test outs. And so any instance where they were already coming in to make sure that I was checking in. And sometimes I would get, I am stressed out beyond my mind. I had two instances where I would have a group fitness instructor just crying her eyes out of, nobody's asked me that all day and I just can't continue on. And so it's not always, I definitely am certain that a lot of those students who say, I'm doing great, they're really not. But also recognizing that at that point, which I have to sometimes reel myself back in, is maybe I am not that confidant to them. Maybe I'm not that person that is going to be giving them that additional push, and that's okay as well. And so now I'm trying to figure out how I want to do that, because we're not going to be having them coming through my office. We're not going to be doing as many of our in-person interactions. Those drop-ins aren't going to be as easily facilitated with our current protocols. And so trying to find those open times. What we did over our quarantine, which didn't go so well, and I don't know why that might be, was having this open hour time slot, come in and chat with me or schedule a one-on-one. We just like the idea of an open time slot. If, just as we're doing now, people could start conversating and realizing, oh, we're all kind of having some connections here. There's some similar things going on, and be able to build on that and create some ideas and community from that. And so with that, I think putting it into that advice piece that you were saying, or what you would say to students, is really just finding, whether it's just one other person, whether it's a peer or a friend or someone who works in the rec, to be sort of that confidant with you. And I think having someone else to talk it through with is really important.
And I'll kind of touch on a reflection piece here for everyone to think about is, you know, you mentioned that you provided space, yet maybe that didn't work as well. And I think as a reflection on campus rec as a whole, we're very good at creating space and opportunity. But then we wonder again, well, why aren't the students coming? So if we can take that learning and say, well, yeah, because we got to go out there, we got to talk to them, we got to create that sense of belonging, we got to engage, we got to let them know that this is what's possible. Think about that when we do that with student staff, and we go, well, I had open hours, why are they not coming, right? And it kind of comes back to, well, what's that invitation? And then I think to Belinda, your very first point about, well, I text every morning, or I, you know, on Mondays, where, you know, sometimes it takes a little bit of buildup to create that, to let them say, and you even said to let you allow yourself to say, I need help, right? Belinda, anything to add to that?
Well, I always like to advocate like from the minute we hire someone that self-care is number one. I was like, I always advocate that I am there for them, that I will step in and I will sub. I was like, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if there's anything from day one, and like it is like a loop, a chain that just kind of keeps going. I'm like that little voice in the back of their head. Every in-service that we have, every meeting, whether it's virtual, I always advocate self-care. And we discuss what self-care looks like, because it might look different for everybody, and that's okay. So for me, it's just giving that, like, I don't want to call it permission, but that like that advocation is very, very important, because I always reflect back to my experience, because that's what it took for me. So being that little voice in the back of their head that's telling them it's okay, self-care is important, it's number one, is what has helped with some of our staff. And it's helped me, and I really hope that it's what helps anyone who kind of comes through this building.
Well, we are running out of time, unfortunately. I feel, again, we say this every week, we could talk for hours. So I want to thank you all so much for sharing. Do you have any final last words about if you were talking to a student staff right now, regardless of whether they want to, continue on in the field or somewhere else? What would you tell them in this moment during this pandemic? What was the one piece of advice you'd give them right now?
Lean into the discomfort, lean into the uncertainty. You will be surprised and amazed by what you can do.
I tell them to acknowledge what they're feeling, because it's important.
Yeah, and I'll echo both of those and say that, yeah, this is uncertain. We're all going through this together, and take the time to make those connections with everyone. And it's okay to just take that time and not constantly be burdened with everything that's going on. Take time for yourself, and that's just as valuable as anything else you can do right now.
And I'll add, we talk about the new normal. I don't think there is any normal. There's maybe what we can expect and what we can understand through our own lived experiences. But, all three of you had different experiences from my experience as a student leader. And so, part of that is, do what you can in this environment to learn, to grow, to do, take care of yourself, to make connections. And though it may not seem like the regular way, there's still, like we started off at the beginning, there's still ways to connect with people if it's not in person. There's still ways to learn and to grow. And so take that opportunity to do that. So thank you so much. I'm really happy that the three of you could join me today. I'm going to end off with saying that if anybody has any feedback for this style of webinar, any questions for our NIRSA friends here, please feel free to use the chat in the next minute or so, and we'll make sure to get that along. Next week, we'll be talking with Will Trent, Sibby Barton, and Scott Flickinger about how we are inviting students into Campus Rec. So we kind of touched a little bit about that with student staff and how we get them. So we're going to take a look at the invitation aspect as a full topic today. So thank you again, Chad, Tanika, and Belinda. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful week, and hopefully we see you next week as well. Virtual wave.